I'm Cruz from Sawdust Studios. Today we're shaping spoons and spatulas from our $20 spoon blank kit. Each kit has enough wood for 4 to 6 spoons and spatulas. I'll show you step by step how to carve, shape, sand, and finish them so they're beautiful, functional, and totally food safe. Let's get started. All right, step one of when we're making spoons and spatulas, especially spoons, is I want to draw my bowl first, because we're going to use something I call the Cruz method to carve out our bowl, which we're using an 1.5-inch cove bit on a router, and that's how we're going to make this bowl. Okay, that's a pretty difficult process. So I want to just draw the bowl and try to get that as perfect as I can, and then design the rest of the spoon once I actually have a bowl. Because more than likely, if I draw the whole spoon, the bowl's not going to match, and I'm going to have to redraw the spoon. So again, we're using some walnut. This is some nice walnut from here in Missouri. I'm going to draw a little bowl, not too big. When I'm doing this, I'm trying to get 4 or 6 spatulas and spoons out of this. I want to make sure that I'm being pretty efficient with the wood. I don't want to draw the spoon right in the middle. So that way I have room. And honestly, if I was being really efficient, I could probably get 10 spatulas and spoons out of this whole thing. I'm going to start with just this one spoon, walk you through that process. And then I'm not going to make my bowl quite as deep as this is. So I'll be able to take the back side of this and probably make a nice little spatula that sits neatly on the back side of my spoon. So I've got my bowl cut. Now I'm going to set it up on our Robu workbench here. I'm going to clamp it down nice and tight. And this is kind of one of the most critical things. When I'm using the router, if this piece of wood moves even a little bit, it's going to go flying across the room, and it's going to get dangerous really fast. So I got to make sure this thing is sitting here nice and tight, and then I'm ready to make my bowl. So I'll plug in the router and we'll get started. All right, here I am set up. I've got my plunge router. This is a Bosch plunge router. This is the one with the trigger is on the handle, which is nice because I have a lot more control. And I'm going to slowly plunge while it's on, and I'm going to start carving out my bowl, trying to make a smooth pass at the very end. That's how I get the nicest bowl where I have to do the least amount of sanding. I'm lowering as I go. All right, so that's a pretty good looking bowl. Now I can draw my spoon out. If I wanted to, I could make it a little bigger, but I like the size of this. My dream for a long time was to have a spoon that I made myself that I could eat cereal with, which is funny because I barely even eat cereal, but this is about the size of a spoon that I could eat cereal with. So I'm gonna draw this out. And it's just a rough spoon blank. I'm not getting too crazy yet, too precise. There I have my spoon blank, and then I'm going to take the back side of this because I didn't go quite as deep, and I'll make a spatula and a spoon out of this piece that I cut out. So now you're going to follow me over to the bandsaw, and I'm going to do that. All right, here we are at our Powermatic 14-inch bandsaw. And I'm going to make sure that I'm always going in that direction as I push through the blade. And like I've said in other videos, I'm going to imagine that blade can't move and I have to push through the front of it. It actually can, but if I imagine that it can't and I push to the front of it, that's when I'm going to get a nice, smooth, safe cut. Okay, so turn this guy on. And I'm just using the line as a reference. I'm not married to it. So there's the beginning of our spoon blank. I'll go ahead and cut the rest out. All right, so here's my spoon blank. Now, I've got to decide what I want my spoon to look like. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to remove as much material as I can. That way I'm not sanding forever. And then I'll consequently end up with this little spatula here, which I kind of like, and I'll go ahead and cut him out. And I like putting a nice little swoop in my handle. That way it gives me a place to put my hand so I can lift it up off the counter. But I don't know if you can see those 2 lines, but I'm going to go ahead and cut those out, and I'll have my spoon blank and my spatula blank ready. All right. So here's my 2 spoon blanks, or my 2 utensil blanks. Now I'm going to go over to our big sander, our edge sander that I love, and I'll shape these out. Follow me. All right, so now I'm here at my edge sander. This is my favorite sander. And my first step is to give my spoon a really nice outline, the actual shape that I want it to look like, 2-dimensionally. So I'm giving the 2-dimensional outline. That's step 1. I want the reveal around the bowl to be exactly the same. I want this to have a nice shape before I start actually removing some material. So I'm going to turn this guy on. And I'm going to work around the bowl, give myself a nice reveal. All right, so I've got the 2-dimensional shape done. I've cleaned up all the lines that I did with the bandsaw. So now I'm ready to start shaping the bowl and the stem. I'm going to start with the bowl. So using this sander, I'm going to move back and forth. And the objective here is, for the spoon, the thickness of the bowl to be the same all the way around. So I'm shaping up. It gets kind of risky. You don't want to make it so thin that you go through, but you don't want to make it so thick that it looks like it was made by a caveman. So there's a little bit of a line here where you're learning how to do it. You might accidentally make your first one too thick or too thin, but as you get better at it, you get more comfortable being close to this machine, you can get a nice perfect bowl. But I'm going to turn this on and I'll start shaping that out for you guys. All right, so as I'm sanding, I'm trying to work right up to that line that the 2-dimensional line. I'm trying to work up to it, but I don't want to go any further because then I'll change my shape. So I'm trying to get that bowl, and then I'm using that as a reference. I keep going back and forth, and I stop right at it, okay? So I'm going to keep shaping my bowl, and then once I'm done with that, I'll show you how smooth that is, and then I'll work on the rest of the shaft. Occasionally, we want to clean up our sanding belt. And this is just a big piece of rubber, and it gets some of that grit out, which gives us a cleaner, nicer sand. So I'm sanding right up to that line, no further. And I'm always moving. I never stop moving. Just keep moving, keep moving. I've got my thumb in the bowl, so I can kind of feel the shape of the inside of the spoon with the outside, All right, so there's my bowl. See, it's pretty good all the way. I get a little thick at the bottom, so I'll take a little bit more off right here, but I'm really, really close. And I'm keeping my thumb in there to help me gauge it. I don't want to go too far. All right, but I'm happy with that bowl. This is a really aggressive machine, so I can only do so much before I go too much. So, and now I'm gonna start shaping the actual spoon. So, if I wanted to, I could just knock off the corners, and it'd be kind of a brutalist, square-looking spoon. It's still not too bad, but I want to actually touch every part of this with the sander, and I want to make it more round. So, I'm going to keep moving back and forth, working those corners, making sure the whole spoon gets some love from the sander. And I'm still shaping. If you got any like lumpy spots, like I got one right there, I move back and forth on it, kind of pinpointing it, but I'm trying to be as economic as possible. So once a spot is good, I don't want to keep touching it because then I'm going to mess it up. You see, I still haven't touched that. Go back and forth a few times. I like that spoon shape a lot. One of the last things I like to do is to make a little relief cut around this. So I go around. Look at how the spoon looks now. I'm going to make one turn. And it's going to really soften it up. It makes it look more intentional. It gives it a really nice little reveal right there. So I'm pretty happy with that. This side's a little lumpy. If I'm being picky, I can sand up to it. Make sure everything looks good before I move on to hand sanding. So there's my spoon blank. All right, I'm gonna do the spatula, but it is driving me a little crazy that this doesn't quite match my bowl. So I'm gonna take a little bit off of this to make it a little bit more delicate, closer to what the bowl matches. If I want to have this shape, sometimes I'll hollow the bowl out more, but I do want to go ahead while I'm at this sander, just take a little bit more off right there to make it a little bit more perfect, and then I'll do my spatula. I'm trying to be really gingerly here, because if I overdo it, then the spoon is kind of ruined. So I'm just barely touching it, coming in. There we go. So now I'm going to quickly knock out this spatula. So same thing, I do the outside first, make it perfect. So now my two-dimensional shape is good. I'm going to shape out this flat part, and we don't want it to be too chunky, right? Because a chunky spoon is not very useful in the kitchen. So I got that a little flatter. I can flatten the back side here. So I did the outside, then I cleaned up this, which will be the finished part, and now I can start shaping the rest of my spatula. All right, so I'll make sure I hit all the corners, go back and forth. I keep moving. I want every part of this thing to get touched by the sander. Pretty happy with that. Nice little egg stirrer or flipper, you know, just a really nice little spatula. What's nice about wooden spoons is that they're food safe. You know, all these plastic spoons, a study came out, it's all poisoning people. It's got heavy metals from melted electronics. I know where these came from. There's no chemicals that are ever going to touch these, so they're going to be totally food safe. So I feel okay with my family using these. I've done as much as I can with these big machines. Now I'm going to set up a random orbital sander on a vise, and I'll finish smoothing these with that before I actually hand sand the rest of the way. So follow me over there. So here we have a 5-inch random orbital sander on a vise. I haven't seen a lot of people doing this. I'm sure somebody else does it though. But I like to use this to make sure I hit all the edges of my spoon. You know, I can still see kind of like geometric shapes where, you know, the big machine is taking a lot off aggressively. So again, I want to make sure every part of this gets touched by this while it's on. I've got 80 grit sandpaper on here right now because I'm still shaping my spoon. And I'll keep shaping until I get to my 220 and 320 grit, which is when I'm smoothing. So here I'm still shaping. So I'll go ahead and sand both of these with this sander. This isn't going to hurt me, so I can get pretty close to it. So I make sure I touch every part of my spoon with the sander. All right, so now they're nice and smooth and ready for me to hand sand. You see, they're not absolutely perfect, but I don't want them to be. I need them to feel and look handmade while also intentional. So they're each unique. They're I free-handed them, I sanded them. I'm not following a pattern, but in their own way, they are going to be perfect. And what's cool about, you know, the way I did it, where I cut it out of the backside, they always will nest together because they're cut from the same piece of wood. But now I'm ready to hand sand. Before I get too crazy though, the bowl is going to be hard to hand sand, and it does have a little lump, so I'll use my my Dremel tool to clean that up, and then I'm going to take some sandpaper and clean up the rest. All right, so I'm going to use my Dremel tool, a little drum, to clean up the inside, just because I have a little burn, and it gets in there nicely. On softer woods or burny woods like hickory and cherry, they'll end up with a burn from the router, and you want to clean up with a Dremel, but you want to barely touch them because sometimes it makes it even worse. But now that bowl does look pretty nice. And I'm going to start with 120 grit paper, and I'm going to start sanding these. Okay, so I'm going with the grit, with the grain. And this is like my chance to actually contour the spoon. So I'm able to really clean up these curves very nicely. And I'm trying my best not to go across the grain, you know, go this way, because it'll leave scratches that are really hard to get out later. But I'm just going to keep moving. And like I said earlier, I'm not smoothing it, I'm still shaping. So any imperfections that I have, any spots that are driving me crazy, the 120 is rough enough that I can still clean them up with it. Whereas once I switch to the 220 and 320, I'm no longer changing the shape of my spoon. At that point, I'll just be making the wood softer. I got the outside pretty well cleaned up. I'll make sure I get in there, clean up that bowl. And I want this to be as smooth and organic as possible. Okay, it should feel intentional. There shouldn't be a spot that looks rough. So even while my shape of my spoon isn't perfect, it feels intentional. You know, it's got a little bit of whimsy to it, which is kind of how I like to make a spoon. I don't like to make it perfectly straight, but it is going to be perfectly smooth. Okay. And then onto my spatula, which is a whole lot easier. Spatulas are probably half as much effort as a spoon because the bowl is so much work, which is why I came up with that router method. Because my first spoon, it took me like 6 hours, and I hand carved it with a knife. And I immediately knew that if I ever wanted to teach people how to do that, I was gonna have to figure out something different. All right, so my spatula's in pretty good shape. I like it a lot. So now I'm going to switch to my 220, and I'm no longer shaping. Okay, so now I'm just smoothing what I already did. I just got to make sure I hit the whole thing, make everything nice and smooth. And this is, I mean, I'm doing it pretty fast, but it's not very fun. If there was any spots that were glaringly bad, I'd be sanding forever. And when I get to 220, I want to be done. But like I always say, you don't want your friends to say, oh, you made this. You're going to keep sanding to 320 because you want your friends to say, ooh, you made this. So we're always going for the ooh, not the oh. I keep sanding. There's my spoon. And don't, when you're doing this, especially if it's your first time, don't expect to do it as fast as I did it. Woodworking is about patience, especially the sanding. But if you rush this part, you're not going to get a nice spoon. So be patient, make sure you take your time. But I'm pretty happy with how those look. So I'm going to switch to the 320 now. And this is it. This is its final shape. And so after this, I'm going to oil them and wax them. And like everything that we make that we're going to have in contact with food, we're going to use walnut oil and our wood wax, which are totally food safe. They're cooking walnut oil. If you have some sort of a nut allergy or you're worried about walnut oil, you can use mineral oil, but mineral oil is petroleum based and it is a food safe laxative. So it's different than walnut oil, which in France they use walnut oil for dipping bread in. So, you know, it's delicious and it's safe. You don't want to use any other oils, olive oil, canola oil, vegetable oil. Those will all go rancid. But I'll grab the oil now. And I got my spoons ready. All right, so now we're going to put our finish on. Like I said, we're going to use that walnut oil. And to do this, I pour a little puddle. And then I can just use my hand. And if you don't want to make a mess, there's paper towels. But I'm gonna get the whole thing covered in walnut oil. And this is like your skin. As long as it stays moisturized, it's not going to dry and crack. And you want to keep these spoons moisturized. Every time you use soap and water, you're going to pull the oils off, and you need to replace them. And if you do, your spoons will last forever. But I've got the walnut oil all spread. I'm going to take a clean paper towel. I'm going to wipe them down just a little bit. And then I'm going to grab the wood wax, which is 4 parts walnut oil, 1 part beeswax. And I'm going to wipe it on everything. And you can see it in the light where it's gotten the wax on it. So I got tons of wax on these. Probably too much. And I say too much because if you over wax them, you're just wasting the wax. Because now I'm going to take a clean paper towel and I'm going to buff it off. So wax on, wax off. And I'm pretty happy with these. You know, my goal was to be able to eat some cereal with this. I had one of my bowls. Here's a bowl. So imagine this is done. I could easily scoop up some cereal. So that's how you make a wooden spoon. Be safe and good luck.